London, 1888. The city was a sprawling urban labyrinth, with narrow, dark streets lined with the mist of fog, casting eerie shadows over the cobblestones. The rich and poor coexisted in a city where the stark contrast of wealth and squalor was painfully visible. In the heart of London's poorest district, Whitechapel, something far darker was brewing. A serial killer, whose name would come to haunt the history books, Jack the Ripper. His identity remains a mystery to this day, his motives unclear, and his crimes unsolved. But one thing is certain: the terror he unleashed in the streets of Whitechapel remains one of the most chilling chapters in London's history. As we explore the unsolved mystery of Jack the Ripper, we'll look into the grisly details of his crimes, the atmosphere of fear that gripped London, and the theories surrounding his identity. This story is not just about a killer, it's about the chilling grip of fear and the unanswered questions that still haunt us. It all began on the morning of August 31, 1888, when Mary Ann Nichols, a 43-year-old woman, was found dead in Bucks Row, a dark and secluded alley in Whitechapel. Her throat had been slashed deeply, and her body had been mutilated. She was a woman of the streets, living in extreme poverty. Mary Ann's life was a tragic one, and her murder was a grim reminder of the brutal conditions that many like her lived under. Her body was discovered by a passerby, and immediately, the police were called. They found no clues. No weapon. No sign of struggle. The only thing they found was her body, cold and lifeless in the early morning light. At first, it seemed like a single isolated incident. But as the days passed, people began to wonder, could this have been the work of someone with more sinister intentions? As the story of her murder spread, a dark shadow began to fall over Whitechapel. People whispered of a man who had lurked in the shadows, waiting for his chance. This was just the beginning of a nightmare that would last for months. Just days after the brutal murder of Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman was found murdered on September 8, in the backyard of a house on Hanbury Street. Like the first victim, Annie's throat had been slashed, but this time, the violence escalated. The killer had removed her intestines and left them near her body, adding a level of cruelty that was beyond comprehension. The police were baffled. The killer had struck again, and the manner of Annie's murder suggested that the first killing was no random act. This was the work of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. The city was on edge, and the fear spread like wildfire. Who was this man? Annie was 47 years old, also living on the fringes of society. She had been a part of the same community as Mary Ann Nichols. Both women had lived hard lives, full of struggles. As Annie's body was discovered, the community began to realize that something much darker was afoot. The killer was not just a random criminal, he was hunting. On September 30, 1888, Jack the Ripper struck again, but this time, he didn't stop at one victim. On the night of the double event, two women were murdered within hours of each other. The first, Elizabeth Stride, was found in Dorset Street. Her throat had been slashed, but the mutilations that followed were missing. The police speculated that the killer had been interrupted during his attack, and indeed, there were signs that he had been disturbed. Elizabeth Stride's body was left untouched after the throat wound, but there was still something terrifying about the crime. The police had no idea who had killed her or why. Just an hour later, Catherine Eddowes was found in Mitre Square, her body disemboweled and mutilated in a way that mirrored the previous murders. Her body had been left with her organs removed, and the wounds were deep and gruesome. Catherine had been a 46-year-old mother, living in poverty, much like the previous victims. It was clear now that Jack the Ripper was not just killing at random. He was taunting the police, growing bolder with each murder, and with every gruesome act, his reign of terror spread further. As the murders mounted, the killer began sending letters to the police and newspapers, taunting the authorities. These letters were chilling, mocking the police's inability to catch him. The most infamous of these letters was the Dear Boss letter, sent to the Central News Agency. In it, the killer called himself Jack the Ripper and claimed responsibility for the murders. He also bragged about his crimes, boasting that he was smarter than the police and would continue his killing spree without being caught. The letters gave the killer a sense of power. Not only was he evading capture, but he was also tormenting the very people who were trying to stop him. As the letters grew more frequent, the fear in the city grew even more intense. No one knew where he would strike next, and the terror was palpable. Each letter was a reminder that Jack the Ripper was not just a killer, he was a psychological force, playing with the public and the authorities alike. On November 9, 1888, Jack the Ripper murdered his final victim, Mary Jane Kelly. Her body was found in her room on Dorset Street, the most horrific of all the Ripper's murders. The mutilation of Mary Jane Kelly was so grotesque that it left the police officers who investigated the scene stunned. Her body was almost unrecognizable, her face destroyed, and her organs removed with brutal precision. The killer had crossed a line, and what had been a series of murders became an act of pure, sadistic cruelty. After this murder, Jack the Ripper disappeared. The killing stopped abruptly. Was he dead? Had he moved away? Or was he simply waiting for the next opportunity? The city was left with a sense of deep unease, and the questions lingered. As the years went on, many theories emerged about the identity of Jack the Ripper. Some believed he was a local butcher or a doctor, someone with knowledge of anatomy. Others believed he was a member of the royal family or someone from a higher class. The most famous suspect was Prince Albert Victor, the grandson of Queen Victoria, although there was no concrete evidence to suggest he was involved. Another suspect was Dr. Francis Tumblety, an American doctor who was arrested in connection with the murders but was never charged. Many believed that his hatred of women made him a prime candidate for the killings. Despite the numerous investigations, Jack the Ripper's identity remains one of the greatest mysteries of all time. Hundreds of books and documentaries have been made about him, and his crimes are still discussed in hushed tones. Jack the Ripper's reign of terror in 1888 may have ended, but the questions surrounding his identity continued to haunt the streets of London. Was he caught? Did he die? Or did he simply move on to another city, leaving behind a trail of fear and confusion? Today, Jack the Ripper remains one of the most infamous figures in history, his legacy one of fear, mystery, and unanswered questions. The true identity of Jack the Ripper may never be known, but his story will continue to captivate and terrify those who dare to uncover the truth.